Hi! Welcome back to my channel and thank you for coming back. Today is an exciting video. I want to talk today about basically the genre that got me into reading, that ignited my love for reading, and that is thrillers. I am a thriller girl at heart. I would read pretty much anything, but my heart is dark, and anything that's thrilling or psychological or creepy has my approval. And I wanted to come today and give 10 thrillers that I have read and loved that I think are worth reading for anybody else out there who might be looking for a good thriller to sit down and cozy up to, because I know for me as well, thrillers are that genre that just help you all the time. They are the genre that will always get me out of a reading slump, will always get me in the mood to reading, will always hook me. So I was like, I know a lot of these books will probably be quite known because I know some of them are very popular, maybe others won't be. I know there's a few on here that I've not really heard of other people reading, so I'm excited to share, and let me know your thoughts in the comments, because I know, as always, reading is subjective, so there may be books on my list that you've read and not quite loved. But for me, these are 10 thrillers that I've read across the last 3-ish years that have just really stood out to me, and when people are like, recommend me a thriller, I'm like, these are my go-tos. So without further ado, let's get into it. Also, just a quick disclaimer before I get started that all of my descriptions of these books and everything I'm going to talk about will be completely spoiler free and will just include everything that's already explained on the blurbs, because I would not do that. I would not spoil a good story for you. So I don't physically have all of the books with me today that I've read, because I have read a lot of them on my Kindle or I've passed them on to family and friends. So for any of the ones I speak about, like my other videos that I don't have with me, I'll pop a little photograph here showing you the cover so that you know which one I am talking about. But I'm going to start off with a book that I actually do still own, because my brother gifted me this for Christmas last year. I ended up reading it in 2022. I think I actually read it at the end of last year, and it ended up being just one of my favourite books I read throughout the year. So that one is The Nothing Man by Catherine Ryan Howard. This is a serial killer thriller. So this book is formatted so that you're reading a book inside of a book, which is so clever. So this one is based around a woman named Eve whose family had been murdered by the Nothing Man, a serial killer that was prevalent a couple of years ago, had a string of victims and was never found. So she has brought out a book in where she speaks about her stories and her memories and everything she remembers from the night where her family were murdered, because she was only small. But you're reading two timelines, so you're reading Eve's and Eve's book, and then on the other side you're reading The Nothing Man, because he is still out there and he is also reading Eve's memoir about the night that he killed her family. And he is not happy with what she is exposing, because she is giving more clues, she's giving more of an insight to who he was as a person just from the memory she has, because she didn't see his face. And so he is afraid that she is going to reopen the investigation basically and unmask who he actually is. So he sets out to put a stop to that, and there starts our thriller. Catherine Ryan Howard is an Irish author. This entire book is based in County Cork in Ireland, and it is so clever. It will have you at the edge of your seat. It's just everything you would want from a serial killer thriller. There's all those high stakes, you know that things are getting closer to unveiling themselves. Yeah, there's a lot of tension, and I just really enjoyed this one, and I really enjoyed the aspects of getting to read Eve's memoir through either herself or through The Nothing Man, and hearing both of their thoughts on different sections of the book. It's so cleverly written. If you are a fan of serial killer style thrillers, or that being kind of the base of the book, don't skip this one. You'll truly enjoy it. It's written so cleverly, and yeah, I just can't hype it enough. Me forever out here Googling the main characters' names so I can talk about them, because I will forget them when I put the book down. So this next book is another one of my favourite thrillers that I read last year. I actually read this one in the summer and I could not put this book down, and I have not had twists and turns in a book floor me as much as this one. Normally, like, I wouldn't say I'm amazing for figuring out twists in thrillers, but I have, you know, the more you read them, the more you start to like see different patterns, and you start to kind of like use your brain more to figure it out. This one, if you figure this one out, honestly, props to you, because I just was amazed. So this one is called Watchy Left Behind, and it's by Emily Frood. She is just the nicest person ever as well. If you don't, go and follow her on Instagram. She is such an interactive like author on there. Like, she will speak to you, she'll talk to you. I was sending her messages the whole way through reading this book, and she was so kind and so lovely to like speak about it with me. So this book follows our main character Lauren, who is moving to a new house in the countryside, quite a secluded, modern glass kind of building. That's what I got from it, where she's going to live with her partner and his 2 children. They've been told they're there to kind of house sit. They're minding this house for a friend of his. So she moves out there. Obviously it's very secluded, very isolating. She starts to feel very lonely. We go into this story knowing that she had some sort of accident in where she cannot remember a period of her life. So she's still like relearning a lot about her relationship with Paul and her life and everything that's going on. So when she moves out there and she starts to feel more isolated, obviously she starts thinking more about what's going on, and basically tries to put the puzzle pieces together of what happened to her. And what she starts to unveil is not lighthearted. This is a very dark story. It's quite a slow burn, but it's like one of them slow burns that still has you being like, I cannot put this down, like I need to know what happens. But yeah, this one is full of like twists, turns, things you're not going to see coming. I can't even explain how many times I gasped reading this book. It's so atmospheric, it's so isolating. Like, when you're reading this, you can really feel almost the claustrophobia that Lauren is feeling being stuck in this house in the middle of nowhere. Like, I think it's literally in like a woodland. And yeah, it's like the perfect cozy up by the fire and read this book in one sitting. Like, this is a binge worthy read, and it was a solid 5 stars. I've not read any other thriller quite like this, so if you have read this and you know more that are similar, please give me recommendations, because I absolutely loved this and I could not recommend it more. Okay, and third on my list is probably not going to be a surprise to a lot of people, because this author is just a very well-known author in the thriller genre, and that is Lisa Jewell, and this is The Family Upstairs. I was very late to the bandwagon of reading this one, because I know this one has been out a while, and the sequel is out now, which I've also read, and was also a solid 5 stars from me. I picked this one up last summer as well, and I immediately read the second one. The minute I put this down, I couldn't wait to pick up the next one, and I think that just speaks for itself. Lisa Jewell, I've read a few of her books now, and I am just a huge fan of her work. So if you like her work or have read some of her books and you haven't got to The Family Upstairs yet, absolutely add this to your list, because it is a cracker. This is like, I don't even know how to describe this in terms of what kind of thriller it is. It's obviously a murder mystery style novel, but it's so much more than that. It's not really a like whodunit. It's just there's been a murder, it's a couple of years later, and oh my god, there's literally just so much happened in this book. I'm going to read you the blurb because I feel like that puts it better than I could ever word it. So the back says, in a large house in London's fashionable Chelsea, a baby is awake in her cot, well fed and cared for. She is happily waiting for somebody to pick her up. In the kitchen lie 3 decomposing corpses. Close to them is a hazily scrawled note. They've been dead for days, so who's been feeding the baby? Like, you know? And I loved like the themes of like the Victorian house that they're living in, and I can't even explain it. This story is a whirlwind. So much happens. You're basically thrown back in time from when you start reading it to what went on in the house prior to these 3 dead corpses that are now in the kitchen. So you get to find out what happens to them. It kind of uncovers the backstory of what was going on in this house, which is chaotic, but I was here for it. It's so good. And yeah, it's just a story that really drew me in. I became really immersed in the characters and their story. There was just so much depth to it and so much darkness. Like, there's so many dark and disturbed characters in this book. But yeah, cannot recommend it more. For me, Lisa Jewell is just like a go-to comfort thriller writer. If you're looking for just a really juicy, dramatic murder story, Lisa's got you covered. Not me talking about like creepy thrillers, Home Alone, and then I could hear someone moving around. Let's hope it's just a cat. The next book on my list is one that I have not really heard of on any book platforms that I've been on so far. I managed to pick this one up in 2020 during lockdown. It was before I had my Bookstagram or anything, and I found this book through a director. So if you, like me, like dark things and you're into like horror or anything like that, you will know the series on Netflix, The Haunting of Hill House and The Haunting of Bly Manor, which is directed by Mike Flanagan. Well, during lockdown, Mike Flanagan's beautiful wife, Kate Siegel, who acts in most of his productions, started like a book page, and it was actually her page that inspired mine. So this was one of her recommendations, and I knew it was going to be dark and juicy when they were recommending it, so I picked it up, and that is Night Film by Maria Peschel, I want to say her name is. If I pronounce that wrong, I'm really sorry. And this is a chunky boy. I don't have it here with me, but I think this is like 600-700 pages, could be 800, I'm not sure, but it's a chunky boy. It took me a month or two to read because I wasn't reading much at the time, but I could not put this down. I was like, it's one of those books that like ingrains itself into your brain. Like, I was dreaming about it, it was all I could talk about. To me it felt real, and I couldn't not include it in this, and I have recommended it to a few of my friends and made them add it to their TBR because I'm like, I need to discuss this book with someone because it's so good. So this book is based around a horror director whose name is Stanislas Cordova. I had to look that up because I was like, I'm going to butcher saying this. But yeah, in the book he's like a famous horror director who kind of went off the map in terms of like celebrity status. Nobody has seen or heard from him for multiple years, and he's had no new movies, but all of his like cult horror fans are just basically sat in the sideline and waiting for him to release new stuff. But then it comes out that his daughter Ashley, who is also like quite in the limelight, has been found dead, and they are ruling it as a suicide. So when this happens, his like cult fans, who one of them we are following in this story, his name is Scott McGrath, and he is a journalist and longtime fan of Cordova. So when he sees the headlines about Ashley's suicide, he doesn't quite believe that that's what this is. There's a lot of backstory to Cordova. He has a lot of haters. There's a lot of depth to just him as a horror director. And so McGrath decides to jump in and start investigating. He is a ruthless investigator. Like, as a journalist, he goes out of his way to get what he needs, and it can be problematic in some senses, but he will get himself to where he needs to go if he needs to get information. He meets a few people along the way who join him in his investigation because they start to unearth a lot more dark secrets than what was initially just thought, because they just thought that like, oh, it's a suicide, it probably isn't, I wonder did somebody murder her, let's investigate. No. So much more happens in this book. It is literally the most descriptive, beautiful writing I've ever read in a thriller book. I would say this could probably be classed as like thriller horror. There's not necessarily any gore in it. It's just really, it really psychologically gets in your head. For me anyway, and it just, yeah, it's very dark in its writing, and it can just, yeah, it gave me the creeps. It's one of those ones when you're reading it at night and you're like looking over your shoulder in the bed being like, what's going on? But it's definitely more thrilling than it is horror. But I would just say if you are like very opposed to kind of creepy things, then this might not be your cup of tea. But yeah, like it's one of them books that I can't talk anymore about the plot because it would just give away some of the story. But yeah, this one, it's another one where you just never know which way it's gonna go. There's so many elements to this story, and I really wish it was like spoken about more, because it deserves a lot more hype than it gets. So yeah, if you're looking for kind of a more niche thriller, a very dark, gripping, psychological one with a lot of depth to it, give this one a go. It is chunky, but it is absolutely worth it. This next one could also technically be classified as thriller horror, but I was surprised at how thrilling this book was. It is a cult classic, I suppose, in terms of like the thriller horror genre, but I think a lot more thriller readers need to pick this one up because it is so good. And that is Cujo by Stephen King, which I know has been out for many, many years, but I actually only picked this up in 2021, I want to say. It was my first time reading it. My only knowledge of Cujo was from friends when Rachel and Joey are watching it, like gripping each other, being like, oh my god. So I was expecting like a horrible, gory horror, which, don't get me wrong, there is some gore in there, but I couldn't get over how thrilling this was. Like, this was edge of your seat stuff, and if you're not an avid Stephen King reader and you're kind of like, you know, not really giving his stuff a go because you're not into horror, I still think you could read Cujo, because it has its dark elements, but it's not as dark as some of his other books. But do look up trigger warnings, because there is obviously quite a few. It's Stephen King. But yeah, so obviously this one is about a dog, Cujo, who is bitten by a bat and has turned rabid. It's also based around our main characters who are going to the lot where Cujo lives to get their car fixed. But by the time they get there, they end up trapped and stuck in the car because Cujo is outside and he is going crazy. It sounds kind of like dull almost when you're like, oh, this whole book is just based in a car, but trust me, it's not. It's based around so many characters. We're talking about Cujo's owners, the lady who's stuck in the car, her husband, he's away on a conference, so you're following him. You're following so many storylines, and you're sat wondering, like, do these people get out of the car? And all of the elements that build up to this ending, like this crazy ending, I was on the edge of my seat the entire way through. Just, if you are into thrillers and you like things and you don't mind that extra bit of darkness, because I wouldn't actually say this one is scary. Well, for me, not in comparison to a lot of other King books. Obviously, he does write very descriptively, but as I said, if you want to look up the trigger warnings and you're willing to give it a go, this is a cracker of a thriller. Like, I couldn't get over how good this was, and to be honest, it was on my list of Stephen King books, but I probably would have left it like lower down because I wasn't that bothered by it. But it was picked in a book club that I'm in, so I bumped it up, and I'm so glad I did, because it's actually one of my favourite King books I've read to date, along with Pet Sematary. But Pet Sematary is 100% in the horror element, so I'll leave that over there. But I do think Cujo crosses over into thriller too, so if you're willing to give it a go, I 100% recommend it. It is so good. This next one is another one that I feel like has been quite popular amongst the book platforms. It's definitely spoken about quite a lot, and that is The Silent Patient. I found out about this one through Bookstagram because it was like super hyped at the time, and I know since then I've seen a lot of reviews where people either love this or they hate this, and I loved this, so hence why it's in my recommendation list. This one is another like psychological kind of slow burn thriller that keeps you just hooked from chapter to chapter. It's another super atmospheric thriller, very suspenseful. You'll feel very in it. It's one of them ones where I carried the story with me a little bit because I just couldn't see what was coming and it was just constantly on my brain. For me, I didn't guess any of the twists or turns in this book, so that's why it was like a solid 5-star for me, because I was just blown away with the whole ending. I'm going to read the blurb out because, again, this is another one where I feel like my descriptions will not make this sound as appealing as it actually is. So, the blurb says, Alicia Burnson lived a seemingly perfect life until one day 6 years ago, when she shot her husband in the head 5 times. Since then, she has not spoken a single word, and now we're going to find out why. So yeah, like immediately I'm in. What happened? Why did she shoot her husband 5 times? And you're following this one. I think he was a therapist. I can't really fully remember. Maybe I'm wrong. But basically the main character you're following in this is the person who is trying to get her to speak throughout the whole story and is going in and out of the psychiatric unit to visit her. And yeah, you're kind of getting little snippets of information along the way. It's definitely a slow burner in terms of like getting the stuff, but then it has a huge climax at the end where everything is just unfolded. And for me it was so worth it. Like it was just so worth it. It blew me away. It was another one with a really good twist. I've not read any more of this author's work. I know he has another book out now, The Maidens, so I'm going to have to give that a go. But yeah, another one that was a top read for me the year I read it, which I think was 2021. And it was just one of them books that you just read and you want to talk about it with everyone you know. So if you're into that, give this one a go. Next up we have another Bookstagram influenced book. And I know that this author can be quite controversial and people either love her or hate her. For me personally, I really enjoyed this one, and that is Verity by Colleen Hoover. It's definitely different to her other books. I've not read many of her other books, but this one was one when I read the blurb I was like, I'm gonna give this one a go. And for me personally, I really enjoyed how dark and disturbing this book was. I would say this is a very fast-paced thriller. It's very atmospheric. I feel like that's kind of like a word I'm using among these books, but obviously that's a theme that I quite like in my thrillers. This one's about our main character called Lowen, who is a starting writer who is struggling at the moment, like really struggling financially, when she is approached by Jeremy Crawford, who is the husband of best-selling author Verity. He approaches Lowen asking her if she would be interested in writing Verity's next book. We know that Verity was in quite a serious accident and is in recovery and therefore is unable to write, but has a premise for a next book that needs to be written, and that is why he is hiring her. He offers her quite a lot of money to do this and also offers her the option of coming to stay at his house and to use his wife's writing space in order to kind of get into her head and really write this book as if it was written by Verity, because you know that's what fans want from her writing. So she's writing it and obviously she accepts the deal. Now if you want a book with a cracking opening chapter, give this one a read, because the first few lines of this book had my jaw on the floor and I was like, alright, okay, this is what we're in for. I'm here for it. When Lowen moves out there obviously to write the book, she starts to realise like there's a lot more to his wife's accident than what he has told her. He has 2 small kids as well, so she's out there and kind of ends up becoming entwined in his family because they're spending so much time together. There is the beginning of a budding romance there, which is obviously not ideal because this is a married man and his sick wife is upstairs. Very, very unprofessional. But makes for a good drama story. This one is dark. This one gave me the creeps. Like there is some creepy scenes. Like I feel like you could take this book and if you were gonna produce it as a movie, you could definitely fit it into the horror genre. But in general, it is a very captivating, thrilling story and one you will not be able to put down. But there is some disturbing scenes and references and descriptions in this book. So again, if you're thinking of picking this one up, please look at the trigger warnings. If you're not a fan of Colleen Hoover's writing, because I've read like 2 or 3 of her books and it's kind of been a mixed bag for me. I'm not really sure where I stand, but Verity is a strong contender in my opinion. So if you're not really into reading her other books, I reckon maybe try give this one a go. Just read the blurb and see what you think, but in terms of Colleen Hoover's, this one is definitely one of her darker books. Another quite dark book is Lock Every Door by Riley Sager, which I read in 2021 as well, I think. And this is another one that stays with you and will leave you thinking. In this one we're following our main character who saw an advertisement in the paper where they were offered quite a large sum of money to house sit I mean, sounds pretty simple, right? So obviously she's like, yeah, I'll do that. She comes and meets the people and they're just like, basically the only rules are you have to mind this house, you're not allowed any guests, like nobody's allowed to come over, no boyfriends, no friends, no anything. Like this is a very wealthy apartment block. It's filled with quite kind of like elite rich people, so it's like everybody that lives there wants to be kept under the radar, so please don't bring anybody here and just mind the house for a period of time, and at the end of it we'll give you a large sum of cash. So she's like, yeah, great, I'll take this on. Obviously she moves in and yeah, there's a lot of dark secrets being kept in this building. She obviously starts to become more familiar with her neighbours and who else is living in the building. She starts to do her research on some of the people. She bumps into another person who is also house sitting another apartment. I think it's kind of frowned upon that they like speak or interact with each other, but they begin to anyway, and they begin to confide in each other about the things that they are learning about the building and the guests in it. And basically it takes a dark turn and a very thrilling turn, and I was not expecting what was actually happening here and why this job just was too good to be true. This one, I know, again, this was like a love-hate one for a lot of people that read it. For me personally, I really liked the like turns this book took. I thought it was very unique. I've never read anything quite like this. The subject matters of it were definitely sinister. Again, feel free to look up trigger warnings. I don't want to give anything away, I don't want to spoil it, but yeah, it was not at all where I was expecting this story to go, and that for me sold it. I really liked it. It was just very unique, and yeah. This next one holds a very dear place in my heart because this is the thriller that ignited my love for reading, like, period. I've never quite read a book like it. It was a book that my mother actually picked up many years ago when we were going on a holiday, because my mother is deathly afraid of flying. So she went to a local bookstore near us, but she went there and the bookseller behind the counter was so nice, and she just said to him, give me a book that would grip me from start to finish so that I can just read it through the whole duration of the flight and I won't even think about flying. And he was like, I know the exact book for this. And he picked it up, and that was No Time for Goodbye by Linwood Barclay. This one here is just like one of his best, like his best work ever. This book starts by following Cynthia, who is a teenager who's decided to have a secret night out. Like, she sneaks out, she doesn't tell her parents. She comes home, she wakes up the next day, she's late for school because she's like dying of a hangover. When she gets up, her parents are not there and her brother are not there, and she's like, right, okay, everybody's mad at me because they obviously know I snuck out and they didn't bother to wake me up for school, so I'm gonna have to walk to school. So she does that, and by the time she gets home at like 5 p.m, her family are not back. The book then starts on chapter 1, which is set 25 years later, and Cynthia still has no idea what happened to her family. She has not seen him since that day that she went out. Nothing has ever turned up until now, when Cynthia receives a letter in the post that gives her a small snippet of information that gives her chills up her spine, that hints that her parents may still be out there. So yeah, like, that's pretty much all I'm going to say on that book. If that doesn't draw you in, I don't know what will, because immediately, like with those kind of stories, I'm like, I need to find out what happens. I've never read such a mind-bending book in terms of a thriller with twists and turns. Like, this one, again, is another that, like, if you can guess the ending of this before you get to it, like, because I did not see any of this coming. As I've said, I've read quite a few of Linwood's books since then, a lot of which I've enjoyed. There's some that I haven't enjoyed as much, but to me, I don't think he'll ever write a book that will top this. And last, but certainly not least, is my favourite thriller of all time. I would like to say that there was no order to any of the books that I just talked about, but with this one, this easily gets #1 spot for my favourite thriller I've ever read of all time. For anyone that knows me, you're going to know exactly what I'm going to hold up in a second. I picked this one up during lockdown as part of a buddy read with 2 of my friends. Based off the cover, if I had not have buddy read this with them, I probably still might not have picked it up by now, and I'm so glad I did, because I am such I judge a book by a cover person, and it's not good because I've learned so many times from now that it's not always the prettiest covers that have the best content. And this book is Here to Stay by Mark Edwards. Mark has become one of my favourite authors since I've read this book, and he's such a sweetheart as well. He's another one of those authors on Instagram that's just super interactive and just so lovely, so definitely give him a follow. But if you enjoy thriller books and you have not read this book, please give it a go. I know with other books you'd like recommend some to a friend and you're like, but they might not like this. I have recommended this to so many of my friends and family online and in real life, and so far I've not heard one bad word. Like, this book just slaps. It's so good. It's basically about a man named Elliot who meets this girl at a house tour, and they have this like whirlwind romance. They fall in love so quickly and end up getting married pretty much in the space of like a couple of months. Because it's such a like fast-paced whirlwind romance, they've not had the chance to meet each other's families. So when Gemma, his wife, suggests that her family come and stay, he is more than happy to oblige. He is the one in the relationship who has a house, by the way, so when they get married she just moves into his home. And so when she invites her family to come and stay, they are obviously coming to stay with him. So when her family arrive, her sister is just really odd and goes straight to her room and basically doesn't come out for the whole duration of the trip, which Elliot obviously finds very odd. He then soon starts to realise, are her parents hiding something about the sister? Like, is there something more dark going on there? He kind of starts to snoop a little bit, and then he starts to notice scars on his wife's body that he never seen before, because obviously they're not together a very long time. I think it's like 3 months. And the longer her parents are there, the more crazy shit happens. I have never read a book that has genuinely made me like vent out loud. Mark has an absolute talent for writing the most unbearable characters you will ever come across in your life. Like, this book will have you up to 90. You will be ranting and raving, but you will not be able to put it down, and there is just some incredible twists and turns, and this has just blown it out of the park. Like, I've still yet to this day, for me personally anyway, found a book that made me feel the way this book made me feel, because I've never got so mixed up in my emotions reading a thriller before. Like, edge of your seat, you want to rip your hair out. Oh, it just has my heart, and I just would really, out of all of them, like if there's one I would recommend you to pick up straight away, it's this one. So yes, that wraps up just 10 thrillers that I've read over the last couple of years that I just have really enjoyed and would really recommend to others. Please let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books, or if you have any recommendations from your like top 10 thriller list that you would like to recommend to me, because even though my TBR of thrillers is too long to ever get to, I'm more than happy to always add more, because thrillers are just the genre, as I said, that have my heart. So yeah, I will leave it there and I will see you next time.